Hey, it's Darren with Arbitrage Trade, and it is time for Deep Dive with Daniel. Daniel's the one that you see in the bottom right corner, and he likes to bring in things that we like to deep dive into, and sometimes they can be, a lot. We'll just say educational, and so they can be a little long, but we try to, try to make it a little fun as much as we can.
I
This
try to keep it topical, and
it
this
is
one's
topical, yes, it is
definitely
topical.
relevant to the last 2 weeks.
It's relevant and necessary, to be honest with you. Almost all of yours are. So this one we could do without the long titles, but this is from strikes to stocks. Understanding the economic power of unions. You have to do a long title to get all that in. So I mean, there's no other way to do that one. So okay, you were saying I would like to see a chart. I guess you can't, but you know, union power. I'll bet there's been eras that it's been more so and then down to no so, and now we've hit the bottom, kind of like a chart, and the resistance at the bottom, and now we're starting to build back up again. Would you say that's what's going on? I mean, just as a macro?
Yeah, I would, I think, I obviously I haven't been alive all that long for
That's
major,
right.
macroeconomic cycles, but, I have to
Mhm.
imagine kind of the end of the, US automotive industry as we knew it as, like Detroit really booming and stuff like that was probably the last time we really saw unions have a lot of power until those jobs get offshored. And I think now you're seeing a resurgence in unions. You think about Starbucks, Amazon. I know we'll talk about it, but the Boeing unions going on strike,
Yep.
the longshoremen's unions were
Auto
on strike.
workers.
They're
Yeah. Yeah.
not anymore.
Hmm.
I think UPS has had issues in the past, so I think we're
Hmm.
seeing um, a resurgence in some of that from where it felt like the last 10 years to the
Hmm.
degree I paid attention to news. You didn't see a lot. I think even Tesla at point has said they're going to unionize, but it always got voted no because Musk said that if they did it, he'd just like fire them more or less.
Right? Well, I mean, if you look at administrations too, I mean, and the friendly administrations to unions has historically been Democratic, correct? And
Mhm.
then the quote business owners, which is funny to me because I mean, you have both Democrat and uh, Republican owners. It's not like it's all Republican thing. And I know we've talked about that before, but because that cuts into your margins, that cuts into your profit, et cetera, et cetera. The more that you have union employees, and I think the administration, the presidential administration, I mean, what was it been 75% Democratic over the last X amount of years? So it's been friendly. And so that's what's happened. I think we hit the bottom, and now with these, I mean, like I said, out of the last 16 years, it's crept up because of the whatever administration's in place and or Congress has been friendly to that. Am I looking at that right? Maybe or no, or they aren't related, or do you think when if Trump gets president that that's going to start coming back down again? Because again, you have arguments which we'll go over. You were saying that in the long run, it may help your company because you'll have happy
Mhm.
employees. But I don't
Yep.
know. It seems like the bottom line is the bottom line, whether they're happy or not. But uh,
Mhm.
yeah, just go ahead. What's your thoughts on that? I mean, administrations and unions.
Yeah, I think it has less to do, and this is just my theory, right? There's
Sure,
not
sure.
this is I don't have like research behind this, but like
Hmm.
I think the unions have less to do with the administration in charge and more to do with the sign of the times as people
Mm,
feel about um, income inequality,
right,
disparity,
right,
right?
right,
So
right.
I think as like we had ZERP, right, zero interest rates for a long time. Tech people got really rich. We'll take Amazon for
Right,
example, and
right.
the warehouse workers didn't feel like they were kind of getting their fair share. And to be
Mhm.
fair, a lot of those stories, presumably most of them are true, were pretty gnarly, right? I think there does need to
Yeah.
be a kind of baseline that's acceptable for people to work. And that's actually where, the 40-hour work week, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, weekends off
Hmm.
came from was from unions, right? So,
Hmm.
you know, I
So
would consider
the
myself
good result,
somebody
yeah.
pro. Yeah, yeah, I would consider myself somebody pro, like, markets and like free economy, like less government intervention, right? But there does need to be a
Mhm.
floor of what acceptable, right?
That's a
And
good
I
point. I
think,
mean, yeah, yeah, that's a good point.
yep, and I think it's like, well, take the longshoremen for example. Should like longshoremen be ensured safe working conditions and like pay that they deserve? Sure, but should they be able to hold out the economy on something that costs $1 billion a day for, instead of a 50% pay increase, a 75% pay increase? So I'll tell you what, Darren, if we did that to our boss, we would just get fired. If we don't show up to work and we
Yep.
demand 50% more money, we
Yeah,
would
yeah,
just get
yeah.
let go, right? And
Well, that's the
like I
power of
said,
unions, though, is it's number of people, a lot of people
you know,
that could, it also depends on your worth and if you can affect, like you said, the what the company can or can't do. And then and when you look at the longshoremen, it's affecting what the country can do or even the world can do when
mhm.
it comes to that. But like you were getting onto that, but I think that guy's kind of a nut. The guy, the leader of that union. I mean, he comes on and he's trying to guarantee his people for robotic things not taking over. It's like, well, we
Oh,
still need
we
to get
won't get
paid.
into it, but that guy
Yeah,
has to be absolutely corrupt. You're the leader of the
right.
longshoreman group, and you live in a mansion in New Jersey and drive Bentleys. Like, give me a break, you hypocrite.
But if you remember back in the old days, what in the 50s, what was the union leader's name?
Oh, the guy would have been Tony Soprano.
The guy that was they say was buried under concrete under somebody. I don't know. What was his name though? I can't believe I'm forgetting this.
I don't know.
But it was the union boss that yeah, they definitely said he was corrupt as anything. So anyway, all that aside, um, you said something about, and we just kind of covered that, the push and pull. I mean, because that's kind of what it is. It's a tricky balance between making profit and having happy employees, right? That's kind of the basis of what
Mhm.
that part you talked about, right?
Yeah, so I mean, and that
Yeah.
that was that. You know, when you have these unions, they create better working conditions that,
Mhm.
maybe you're reducing profits. In theory,
Mhm.
it's like they're getting better hours and stuff. So in theory, they're being utilized less, right? They're not a consultant. You can't bill them 80 hours a week. That actually, when you create these better working conditions, people are happier, they stay longer at the company, there's lower turnover. And I think maybe that was true at one point in time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I kind of feel like, and I my perspective is like I started my career in tech, like I've kind of had jobs in that sphere, is that there's no longer company loyalty, so there's no longer employee loyalty. So I think, you know, I don't know how much that applies anymore, but I've also never had a job where, kind of unions would make sense, and I felt like my satisfaction was, you know, tied to how I was treated. Where every job I've had was to
Right.
make money, and I've had the opportunity to make more money in that job. So I was like okay with less than ideal working conditions. It's like, well, yeah, but it's like here's my
Yeah.
chance. So maybe if you don't have that chance,
Yeah.
right, you wanna a little more protection. Like I can completely understand it. I
Yeah.
just don't know if there's
Yeah.
strong evidence for it.
Well, I think the one thing that I forgot to bring this up, but it's inflation. And it's a your cost of living the way is going to go up as long as inflation goes up. So it's like we do have to have these cycles that okay, employees are making this amount. And then Congress works really hard to just throw our future generations' money away. But what do I know? And though inflation goes up, right? And then now all of a sudden these guys are not making enough money, living wages, they say. And then if it's almost like sports, because when you have free agents, they can go wherever they want to and make money, more money by going somewhere else. especially if and it also depends on the like tomorrow's job claims again, but it also depends on unemployment. There's all these things that kind of mix in here that go with the unions, um, because if I'm having to pay $20 for an apple now, it's you have to make more money. You have to make more wages where you are, and if and that's the battle. Is that these companies are making more money because they're charging more, because their margins are going up. So now you need to raise my because they won't do it on their own necessarily. So now I have to have a union. So maybe it is becoming more and more needed again to keep the corporate CEOs in check. I don't know. I think that's kind of
I mean, I
you.
think, this is kind of like in relation to your point, this wasn't a union, but McDonald's raised. Actually, no, this is a better example. You can look at the state of California as a whole,
Oh,
right? Have the highest minimum
yes,
wage.
yes,
They, raise it the most, right? In theory, that is great for the employees, but the catch is then all it does is raise the price of whatever good is being serviced by that employee
right,
by more than
right,
the amount that the income was raised of the
yeah,
employee. So
yeah, yeah,
now, even let's say you were 5% behind before, now you're 7% behind now, but you just have a little bit more money in your pocket when really you have less, right? Because your spending power is less. Um,
exactly, 100%,
and what is
100%.
the answer to that? I don't know, right? Obviously, wages need to keep up with inflation, but we've seen it with McDonald's. They have to have a subsidized meal by Coke to have a $5 meal again because their
Yeah, yeah,
costs are so expensive.
they just keep bouncing back and forth. I mean, you raise this, now this has gotta go up, then it's just back and forth, which is what I've always thought. Every time I hear about, raising minimum wage, etcetera, mandates, and I think that's why you hear more and more about, I hate to use the S word, socialism, but that's the worst case in my opinion, not letting corporations place law on supply and demand and then having it mandated by a government. I have never seen that work right. So it's like we're kind of making our way towards that. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see. Um, so, I mean, that's kind of what this next section was, which is just economic policy and regulation. Look at that. I just nice segue. But shaping economic policy. So, um, I mean, if we were to go macro here, and I think I said this earlier, but whether it's true or not, it's Trump is business friendly, and Harris or whoever she represents is not very business friendly, um,
Mhm.
because they want to have mandates on prices, no price gouging. Okay, what determines the price gouging? Can I go specifically after this company versus this company because this company I like and this one I don't? So I'm going to say this one's price gouging and that one's not, and then they get to choose which companies are successful and which are not. And boy, doesn't that sound like China right now? So it's just a scary moment here in time that we may be facing, depending on who's at the helm. And I'm not it doesn't matter the president, it's the administrations behind them. So is that what you were going at with this, with the unions and the economic policies and regulations that we don't want to get to a Venezuela or a China?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate because I think a lot of things when the government does step in, they do with the best intentions. But maybe I can write an article about this next week. But there's a really good chart showing anything that the government has kind of like regulated and like kind of set price in and it, like has a big hand in. The
Mhm.
prices I can't remember the timeline, but have skyrocketed like 8x. Let's say like,
Yeah,
when you think of like healthcare, right? But then
right.
you look at like the cost of like the internet or something. It's like very marginally increased relative. It's two times increased over
Mhm.
however long, 30 years, where healthcare has like 8 times increase. Um,
Mhm.
and so, I think it's one of those things where, you get a lot of these government policies that kind of back these unions. And, in the long run, it kind of backfires. But, like we said earlier, that there's no good, I don't know the good alternative, right? Because I think a minimum wage is a pretty good thing. Like 40
Oh,
hour
sure,
work
sure.
week kind of
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
standard is pretty good. Healthcare, pretty good. So yeah, I don't know, but
That's
it
if you
definitely,
do, then you should run for president. That's for sure, because
yeah, I know,
it
yeah.
continues to be what's the solution for it? That's for sure. So anyway, you talked about certain strikes that has had impacts. You mentioned the 73 auto workers strike, the Boeing machinist strike, UPS strike. We talked about the longshoreman strike, and I mean, did they? I think it remains to be seen if any of the ones that have just happened if that's going to make the company better or worse. I think we don't know yet. We'll have to see. It takes a couple of years, I think, for it to kind of just seep into the company to see if it's any better or worse. Um, Anything else you want to add to that before we get to the conclusion? I mean, just anything else to throw in maybe we missed that you wanted to stick out and tell us? You talked about Uber and Lyft. They got interesting things
You
coming up.
know,
So,
I'll say with these strikes, if we look at them historically, like the auto workers strike, what happened to that industry? It got sent out of the US so it could be more profitable, right? We look at
hmm
the Boeing machinist strike in '08. Well, what's happened since then? They cut a million corners to save on costs, right? So they could be more profitable.
so
And
parts will fly out of the
UPS,
air. Go
yeah,
ahead.
right. And with UPS, like obviously they haven't gone anywhere as a company, but I'm sure it
hmm
only made DHL and FedEx more competitive
Right.
against them
Yeah,
during
you
those
have to.
times.
You have to. You lose your best workers if someone else is
Mhm.
paying better. You definitely will. So that's the competition part, because maybe some of that also is if companies get together, which they're not supposed to, and say, okay, we're going to agree not to pay our people more, so therefore we can all stay at this certain pay rate, if you will, and nobody will lose any of their good workers. Versus a union coming in and blowing that all up and going, okay, well we're going to fight for this specific one, and then the others have to adjust. So it is an interesting thing. I grew up not appreciating unions, I guess, because you always heard about, man. I wish I could think of his name. I always heard about that guy who's supposed to be buried in Chicago, the old union boss, how bad he was, and how corrupt he was. And like you mentioned, even like the longshoreman dude seems to be corrupt. But maybe it's a necessity we have to have. It's just a part we have to have. Um, it just I don't know how close to socialism and everything being run by unions is.
Was
So that's
it
the
was it Jimmy Hoffa?
thank you. Yes, Hoffa. Man, that's the one I'm thinking of. Was he was union, right? Union guy? No?
He was an American labor union leader who
Yeah.
served
So
as the president of the International
right.
Brotherhood of Teamsters
There you go.
for
See,
like
so and the gangsters,
15
right? I mean,
years.
yeah, it was I think he said he was connected to
Yeah, he
the
he
the gangsters
is
basically.
notorious for his alleged ties to organized crime
There you go.
and for
See?
his disappearance under mysterious circumstances in
There you go.
1975.
Thank you for filling in all those blanks I couldn't. But yeah, it's because he's so well known. But I guess we got to hope that we're not still in that era. Just that you don't see it, that everything's tied to something else. But you know me and my conspiracy theories, so I'm going to say yes, we are. All right. So I mean, the bottom line, and we'll wrap it up with this. And what we're really most interested in is its connection to stock prices. And you kind of touched on that. Um, I mean, just give us a brief on um, this specific strike and what may, if you remember, like what it did for some recent stock performances, and then we'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I mean, so when a company has a real strike, we look at Boeing. It
hmm
is just inevitable that it's going to see a short-term down,
hmm
streak. And until they get it figured out, rarely do you start to see any kind of tick up. Maybe, a little bit before there's an anticipated deal to
hmm
be reached. But then it's, to be seen on the company of how they handle things afterwards of where the stock really goes. There's um, no kind of prediction there. But, in the short term, if you see a strike actually happen, even on the news, starts to trade down. So.
Yep.
Be wary of
Yep.
those
Yep. Yep.
holdings.
And it's always a good play, right? I mean, that's what they do. They
Hmm.
make money going down, then they make it coming back up, and maybe it's all coordinated. You know me.
Never waste a good story.
Or crisis or war or anything that has any possible narratives. We'll end it on that. Do I have my hat? Oh, I took my conspiracy theory hat home.
Uh,
All right. But no, appreciate you bringing up this subject. And you're right. It is right on time here. We'll have to see what happens in a couple of weeks with the elections and then see what happens after that with everything you just talked about and see if there's more union activity or less union activity. And we'll see you next week there, Daniel.
Sounds good, Darren. Have a good one.
All right. Bye.